Give a little whistle. A couple of you did. All right, and so a couple of you even know what I'm talking about, right? That's how we summon Jiminy the Cricket, right? He's the lovable cricket that plays the role of Pinocchio's conscience. Do you know that in the original story, he had a different fate. In the 4th chapter of Collodi's book, the talking cricket was a philosopher who attempted to advise Pinocchio, and the puppet got mad and smashed him, which I think may tell us more about how much we had in common with society back when Pinocchio was being written more than anything else. This idea of what is philosophical or perhaps even what is conscientious may lead us to want to smash. So originally, a pompous, uptight little cricket, Jiminy's personality was changed when the voice talent of Cliff Edwards was added to the film. But I'm always curious, right? So in Pinocchio's world, where does Jiminy come from? Was he already in Geppetto's shop? Did he appear when Pinocchio appeared? Was he summoned? I don't know. I'm asking for a friend. Because I can think of one or two folks who might be able to use a crickety conscience. We are, it seems to me, many of us experiencing a world of moral confusion, where we talk about politics and we talk about rights, but we don't talk about what's right. Or maybe we talk about who's right, but not about what's righteous. And we miss so much of what's important when we do that. You may remember DJ Salinger writing, "Among other things, you'll find that you're not the first person who was ever confused and frightened and even sickened by human behavior. You're by no means alone on that score. You'll be excited and stimulated to know many, many men have been just as troubled morally and spiritually as you are right now. Happily, some of them kept records of their troubles. You'll learn from them if you want to. Just as someday, if you have something to offer, someone will learn something from you. It's a beautiful reciprocal arrangement. And it isn't education, it's history, it's poetry." And so what he's proposing is that we learn from the people who came before us, that they teach us how to build a conscience, how to build a moral repertoire, as it were. And I think about this a lot because I try to consider where it is. Where is it that we go for our moral interlocutors, for the discourse around what is right, around what is righteous? And I worry about this. Anybody here in computer or in tech or anything like that? Yeah, okay, so if I say giggo, do you know what I'm saying? Garbage in, garbage out? Yeah, okay. So if what we feed our moral conscience isn't worth feeding it, then the way that we live our lives won't be worth living either. So giggo is common to computer science and mathematics. The quality of the output is determined by the quality of the input. So what I'm proposing tonight is that we very intentionally choose our moral interlocutors. That is, what we consider our own morality, not in vague comparison to memes or tweets or articles or news programs, rather that we intentionally seek a living, breathing person with whom we can address our moral quandaries. Joshua ben Pirchia and Nidre the Arbalite received the oral tradition from their ancestors, and then Pirkei Avot 1:6 goes on to say, Yehoshua ben Pirchia Omer, Oseh lecha rav ukne lecha chaver vehave dan et kol ha'adam lechaf zechut. Joshua ben Pirchia used to say, appoint for yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a companion or a friend, and judge all with the scale weighted in their favor. All right. And I think that the order of what he is saying here is important. He says, first appoint for yourself a teacher, and then acquire for yourself a friend. And I think sometimes what we do is the hefech, is the opposite, that we find our friends and we turn them into our moral teachers, possibly based on a common morality already. And what this is saying is that first find yourself a teacher. And there's an interesting debate among people who study this section about whether that teacher will become your friend, or it is through that teaching that then you acquire friends. And then judge all with the scales weighted in their favor. And we'll come back to that, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. But first, I want to ask you, who do you choose as a teacher? Not who were you assigned to, and not, who do you sign up to get their alerts, but who have you determined in your life to be your teacher? Jewishly, we have a concept called chavruta. Right? And this is when we go and we study text. We don't study it alone, we study it in pairs. And our chavruta inevitably is someone who pushes us beyond our thoughts, who argues with us, who says, but have you looked at it this way? Or maybe we're misinterpreting it. And in a lot of ways, our chavruta then becomes our teacher. And I want to know, within our own lives, who helps us determine the path we want to walk in the world, and who holds us to the moral promises we have made to ourselves and to everyone else. We don't have to choose someone perfect, but we do need to choose someone we trust, and someone who will be brave in the face of our indignation. For some of us, we are fortunate, we have a spouse that when we come home and we say, do you know what they said? Says, well, they do have a point. It'd be nicer if they said this with a glass of wine, but fine. So some of us are fortunate to have that in our life partners, but some of us, that may be too close. And for others, we may pick people who are too far. Even in a global society, a moral interlocutor who exists in a different time zone can be hard, because to find someone with whom to discuss pressing and important issues, it's useful if you can sit down together, if you can see each other's faces. Beyond that, some of us wait until we are in a moral quandary, and I want to encourage you. I think that one of the ways that we show love, both to ourselves, to those in our lives, and to the world at large, is by thinking ahead. We can't anticipate every moral issue that will encroach into our lives, but we can anticipate a lot of them because we know where people get hung up. So also in Pirkei Avot, this time in 3:17, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah says, without Torah there is no social order. Without social order there is no Torah. Without wisdom there is no conscience. And without conscience there is no wisdom. Without knowledge there is no understanding. Without understanding there is no knowledge. Without sustenance, this is the part that most people know, there is no Torah, and without Torah there is no sustenance. That's a long way of saying that everything relies on everything else, and that for him in particular, Torah was at the center of it. And I want to encourage our congregation to make Torah at the center of our moral lives, and to consider somewhat regularly, how do we want to behave in the world? And I ask this, and I really will talk more about this tomorrow, because tomorrow I'm giving a different but related sermon. If tonight is about understanding our morality through intentional discourse, tomorrow is how to take that personal understanding and interact with the larger social sphere. But today, I want to know, who will you commit to living a life of Torah to? And when I say living a life of Torah, what I don't mean is that you're going to be here week in and week out for Shabbat, although that would be nice, and not that you are going to sit down every day and study some Torah. That might be nice too. But what I am saying is that you will take our tradition of chavruta and push yourself to more moral understanding, so that when you find in a situation, maybe a temptation, maybe the temptation is another person, maybe a temptation is in someone else's belongings, but that you know where you stand, and that you have someone that says, are you sure that that's who you want to be and who you intend to be? As as I was writing this sermon, I wake up in the middle of the night a lot, and I was reading the news, and you'll forgive me for giving a political anecdote, but I was blown away. I don't know if you knew this, but I read this very recently, that when Vice President Pence was uncertain of what to do on January 6th, he called Vice President Dan Quayle, who told him what the right thing to do was. I have to say there's no love lost between me and either of these men, but I am fully impressed. One, that they would reach out to one another, and that two, that they would listen to each other. And what I want to know is, do you have someone who, in the face of a lot of pressure, would say to you, Chaver, Chavera, friend, do what is righteous, do what is right, do what the person who you aspire to be would do. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch writes, the Torah considers everybody who counts, measures, or weighs anything to have the responsibility of a shofet, of a judge. You are an officer of justice. You pronounce judgment as to what is right and fair. Your word is mishpat, a declaration of what is right. And this places responsibility for honesty and legality of things in general in the hands of the conscience of every single person. It's a hefty weight. And I think that sometimes we go through our lives unaware of the weight that we have in our hands by deciding that there is someone with whom you will share your moral fears and your moral hopes. You open up yourself to taking responsibility in the world, yes, for your own behavior and also for the behaviors of those you know and love. A British sociologist by the name of Bev Skaggs wrote, "It is up to the individual to choose their repertoire of the self. They do not have access to the range of narratives and discourses for the production of the ethical self. They may be held responsible for choosing badly, an irresponsible production of themselves." So here and tonight, I want to say to you that each of you gets to be responsible for the person that you are. And that is a very big job. And so I want to invite you to bring someone in, not to give them the responsibility of your life, but to have an advisor, an interlocutor, who helps you to choose the path that you might advise yourself if you were an outsider. Because I think too often we find ourselves in the solitude of our own lives, unwilling or unable to take the balcony view. Yom Kippur is the opportunity for that balcony view. And I want to ask you, stand up there with someone else, look upon your life, and decide of the way of the right and the way of the righteous. So that when we say tzedek, tzedek tirdof, righteousness, justice shall you pursue, that you know that you are on that path and you are not on that path alone. Gmar chatima tova.